So I've been asked to speak about my journey and integrate it with the work I do. So I'm going to try and, more than about myself, I'm going to try and tell you a bit of my journeys and my experiences because, at the end of the day, and I would like to interact with you guys later and learn from you. So it all started when I was about 16 years of age. When I attended my first Model UN conference in school. Now the story of me attending was I was told by my teachers not to attend because I wasn't the IIM types. I was probably a backbencher in my school. So, but somehow I managed to get to attend that module, and I wrote to the organizers myself, and I said I'd really like to come. My school not letting me go, blah blah. So I got to attend. It was at the Taj President, very fancy. Then I saw that there were these bunch of children in expensive suits debating about Bosnia and Herzegovina and all basic jargon. And I said, what the hell, we're sitting in this fancy 5-star and we're eating fancy food and we're talking about hungry kids in Africa and the war in Bosnia, etc. So I got an idea. I said, why don't I organize a Model UN conference for people like me, people like you, people who actually, what I say, are not lucky sperms. That is, children not born in wealthy families but are actually wanting to make their own legacy, wanting actually to learn stuff on their own. So I formed something called the Indian International Model United Nations Conference. It ended up becoming India's largest private model conference with students participating from across the country. I think when I stopped it in 2007, about 2,000 people had attended in 2.5 years. So we had 18 months in which we attended conferences every 3 to 4 months. So that was my first, immersion into this space of engaging with youth. And at that point, I used to approach sponsors for the Model UN conference, and they would always ask me. This is about 2005. They would always ask me, "Hey, how does Indian youth think? How does Indian youth buy? How does Indian youth consume?" Because at that point was the starting of the recognition of the potential of young India, in the sense that we were poised to become one of the world's youngest populations, and people were still figuring how our youth behave. Because there was no matrix to measure influence, there was no matrix to measure factors that influence various decisions that young people make in those times in 2005. That time we didn't have online marketing, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Twitter, Orkut was just on the rise. So this thought was in my head always. People always keep asking me that you're working with thousands of young people, tell us more about them. So I got this one idea. I clearly remember one night at a bar actually, 17 years of age. Most of the things happen while you're on some of the other high, always realize some of the best ideas. Thank God there's no faculty here. So I was at a bar with a friend and we were discussing, we were having a beer, and I said, hey, I met this guy from United Breweries who asked me, what can I do to influence youth to buy my beer versus the other? And I was having this debate, and that's when I got a brainwave that, hey, why don't I start a business of telling brand managers about how young people behave? I am 17. I am the target audience. I know how I think. I know how my friends think. But that brand manager of 50-year-old doesn't. So what if I figure out a way to go and sell information about myself to him? Because that's what he's seeking all the time when I'm interacting with sponsorships, this, that. So I wrote to Vodafone, who had sponsored my first Model UN, and at that point it was Hutchison Max. I wrote to Hutch and I said that, I'd like to come and meet you. I have some answers to the questions that you would pose to me. So I went. One of my biggest advantages till now is that I'm young. So people, and those who are older to you, have this emotional quotient involved. So they always like to encourage young people. I'm sure you also get that whenever you guys are doing something. We have that age to our advantage. So I went up to him and I said that, you've asked me so many questions where I can give you sponsorship. I have a business idea. I'm starting a consultancy on telling brands about youth. He said, wow, this is brilliant. Encouraged me, gave me my first project, it was a research project. Got about $1.5 lakh at the age of 17. That's very brilliant. That was my start, where that was a turning point in my life. Now, parallel to that, the United Nations India office recognized my Model UN program. So I was approached, I was asked to write an email to the then Under Secretary General of Public Affairs of the UN, Shashi Tharoor, and said that, because you are Indian, because he's Indian, somebody told me, write to him and see how the UN can work closely with youth in India. At that point, there was only Model UN. The UN never really approached Indian youth in 2006 and 2007. So I wrote an email to Dr. Tharoor, didn't know him, nothing. The idea was that at that point there was a lot of talk about the Millennium Development Goals. Of course, the millennium had passed, but the goal had been met. So, so there was a lot of talk, and there was very little awareness about the MBDs in India at that point. So I wrote to Dr. Tharoor and I said that, I am so and so from India. I've been organizing these modular conferences, and I would like to collaborate with your department to spread awareness about the Millennium Development Goals in India. So he replied, I think really that was another turning point in my life when Dr. Tharoor wrote to me and said, I've gone through what you do, and why don't you get in touch with my office in India at the United Nations India Center in New Delhi. So he put me on there. I wrote to them. They said, brilliant, we want to spread awareness with Indian youth, so why don't you come over to Delhi? I went to Delhi, I made a presentation on what I can do for them. They flew me to New York, I made another presentation on what I can do in New York for India. Loved it, I got my first funding from the UN, and I did something called the Global Millennium Development Goals Conference, which was basically about students from about, I think roughly about 70 countries from across the world participated in India. At my college, I hosted a Jain College in Bombay. And that was the other turning point in my life, and I started realizing that, okay, on one side I am doing youth marketing, the other side I'm doing something to do with social change. My second idea was, is there a way to integrate both of them, right? So this is basically what I do. I enable young people for social change, and I consult brands on how to engage youth. So youth is the core of what I do. So this is to set the context of what I'm about to speak. Now, cut to about 2000. My company had grown, we had done very well, we had lots of clients, we had lots of credibility. We were then, and we are the only ones talking about youth in an academic and more scientific manner. We just don't give jargon saying India is the youngest country in the world, we have so much potential. We actually break that down for you, and I'll tell you what we do as we go along. So in about, I think 2011, end of 2012, a company called Mudra. You may have heard of Mudra advertising. Yeah. So Mudra, I bumped into the guy who had Mudra at some event, and of course I had been well covered. The press always likes covering young people, so from a very young age I've been exposed to media. It's a great learning point because you get to learn how not to let it influence you. So he had known about me. He said, can we do something together? So I went to his office and I said, I have this consultancy or youth engagement. He said, look, this Mudra group, there are 100 clients here. We have a big office infrastructure. We have, so Mudra is, Mica, right? So a lot of Micans used to work for Mudra. So they are basically planners, and they are taught how to plan for a brand, a skill which I didn't have. So he said, why don't we do a JV? So again, as a 19-year-old, then you're doing a joint venture with the Mudra group. Sounds very exciting. So I said, let's go for it, man. So that was the third turning point where I signed a JV with the Mudra group. Where now, which is from then to now 2014, we've become the country's largest and only, and therefore the largest youth marketing agency with about 100 plus clients. Now what we do, so the first challenge was, are you guys marketing students? Any of you marketing, do you guys do market research? I don't know. So okay, so you guys know the concept of SEC, right? Socioeconomic class. Now the challenge in marketing to youth at that point, and still is you cannot segment youth. Alright? I might be living at Malabar Hill in Bombay or south of Delhi. So you would assume that I'm a very rich guy. You would assume that my father is doing very well, so I can buy the most expensive phone. I'm a target audience for the most expensive alcohol brand. But the truth of the matter is that the wealth of the parent, the household income, does not pass on to the child, which is a very basic knowledge, which is a very basic truth that we all know. So how do marketers then identify who their target audience is? Because visibly somebody is rich, but he may not actually have the money. But then we also have an aspirational class in India which is able to earn money one way or the other and still buy. So for example, in Dharavi, I have seen boys with iPhones, not stolen, they actually buy. Dharavi is on the slum in Bombay. Versus in Malabar Hill, there's more sale of Nokia Asha and these lower phones because Gujarati live in Malabar Hill, they don't need to spend a lot of money. So the Gujarati young boys are not a client for us. And that's a fact, it's a sales fact. So then what do brands do? They get confused, right? Who do we sell to? So after they deal with Mudra, we started developing tools to segment and target youth. So I'll give you a brief in one of the examples of what we did, and I'll email one presentation to Inag, which he could circulate to all of you, just for you to realize some work that we've done. We developed a model called the youth archetype model. So my hypothesis is that you cannot classify Indian youth. There is nothing called Indian youth. The 18-year-old in Shillong is very, very, very different from the 18-year-old in Guwahati, let alone Bombay or Delhi. So we developed something called the youth archetype model, where we have a theory of saying that there are 7 different persons in one young individual. There are 7 different personalities in one young individual, and they are based on the product type. So for example, I'll give you a little example. So say I am very good with food and travel, right? So but she is not. So I am an influencer for her for food and travel. But now she is pro with technology. So whenever I want to buy a phone or a laptop, she becomes my influencer. You guys getting what I'm saying? Yes. Because typically what you do is, in the olden days, it was always you would only look at one person to influence many on all product categories. So for example, if I have 2,000 Twitter followers, I become an influencer. But that's not true. I am only an influencer for what I am an expert about, for what I am passionate about. So based on that, it's a bit confusing, I know what I'm saying. I'll send you that report. You'll realize what we've discovered is I can exactly tell you what kind of product she is going to influence her peers, and what he will influence his peers. So that knowledge that we developed was later transformed into an electronic tool where we collected a database from about, I think, a lakh plus 18 to 25-year-olds from across the country. And today with that database and that tool, we are able to predict what kind of people will buy what product and what will influence them to purchase. So similar projects is what we did in the space of youth research. And as I said, we've evolved since then to a full-fledged youth marketing offering. Now parallel to that, the kind of work that I used to do, as I said, was social change and marketing. So one of my first projects that I took up was something called youthportal.in. It's dead now. It was basically a social network of young people making change on ground. So my idea was that, there's a guy in Delhi doing something really cool with the environment. There's a guy in Bombay also doing the same. But they can't meet on Orkut. That time Facebook was still in the rise, so they can't meet on Orkut, right? Because Orkut you only put pictures and you only put personal profile. You don't put about the work you do. There was no LinkedIn at that point. So we created something called Youth Portal, which connected young change makers. It was a very successful portal with about 8.5 lakh members, but I was not able to monetize it, so I had to close it down. At that point, social media marketing was not yet on the rise. So Youth Portal was the first project that I did. After that, I got really exposed to more young people in the space of social change. I got exposed to more college kids. The UN projects were on. Then my second big project after youthportal.in was that I adopted second project, and I think the most closest to my heart is I adopted a school in Dharavi. That's how I get to talk about Dharavi. It was closing down. 2007, the government very funnily, Maharashtra government stopped funding Marathi medium primary schools. Absolutely no logic. So 2007 it stopped getting funding, and I got to know about this school in 2012. So they had some reserves left. So we adopted the school, and we realized that these kids, there were 150 primary kids. It only cost about $8,000 a year to educate one child, which is pretty much one night's bill if we go to a restaurant, right? So I put together some money, put in some of my own, and we got some friends to put in money. We saved it. Then we entered the school and said, okay, look, now we've obviously saved the school from closing down. But I looked at the books, I looked at the curriculum, I looked at the teachers, and I said, these guys learn shit. They have, that guy from Dharavi can never come to IIM. It's not about the money, but he doesn't have the confidence, doesn't have the self-belief, does not have the skill sets. But he can. I think those kids are much smarter than what we are. Just that we live in a bubble. Those kids have actually seen reality. They know what hunger is. They know what aspiration really means. So I interacted with those kids, and it's been about 2 years now, and twice a week we go there. Now we work towards getting a computer lab, we work towards building infrastructure, but most importantly, I'm trying to do an experiment of creating a very radical curriculum parallel to the government curriculum, and have each one of these 150 children in my school become leaders and examples of their community, so that more and more people in the area of Dharavi start coming to school, because a lot of people don't come to school in that area. So that is one project that I do, where I get college kids to come and volunteer at the school. We are developing, I've engaged some educationists, I've engaged some people who work very closely with TED, were very radical thinkers, to come and work with the school and see what we can do. So that's the Dharavi school. Now, I was at this conference somewhere, I remember, I think it was Delhi, and somebody posed a question to me and said that, why don't young people participate in efforts towards enabling positive change in society? It was a very interesting question, because, if there's unfortunately, if there's a rape, we're all there on the streets with candles. But, or if there's political uprising like the Aam Aadmi Party, we're all always there. But on a daily basis, young people don't participate or make any effort to make any change in society. We love excitement, right? So obviously, as a youth marketer, I would develop strategies which would make my client's brand cool, right? That's the key word, cool and vibrant. So I was thinking, can I do something to make social change cool? I did Youth Portal. It worked because it was a website, it was a social network, there were young change makers, everybody came, sounded exciting. So when that question was posed to me, I got my next business idea, which is how to make social change cool, right? If I make social change cool, not only will I attract more young people to participate, which obviously in effect contributes to society, but I can also make it into a revenue model, which is what my new startup is called Social Quotient. I'll explain to you about what happened. So I did an experiment with a campaign called Operation Black Dot, which registered 40,000 first-time voters. Now what I did is, it was, of course, there was a Modi wave and this and that, but the truth of the matter was that very few college kids, a very insignificant percentage of kids in colleges in Bombay had a voter ID. Because A, politics is not cool, B, young people don't know who the bloody MP is, let alone going out to vote, and 3, they did not want to take the effort and the tedious part of making a voter's ID. Everybody wants to tweet and Facebook post on how Manmohan is quiet and how Modi is loud and how this and that should happen, but actual transaction of voting never used to happen. So a bunch of us brainstormed, my team, we created a campaign called Operation Black Dot. The tagline being, making politics easy, engaging and fun. What we did was, first thing, we developed a software by means of which I could generate your vote, I could finish your entire process of your voter ID registration sitting in your college campus. All you got to do for me was give me whatever 2-3 documents are required. I could digitalize those documents. I already had done a tie-up with the Election Commission. So you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to go talk to the babus. You just come, talk to a pretty looking girl. It really works. I put a pretty looking girl and a really cute looking guy at the counter in 60 campuses across the country. Obviously, right, the Red Bull trick. Red Bull, those girls are always standing outside giving you free Red Bull. You go and take a free Red Bull even though it's bad for you. So there's a really hot looking girl, a really cute looking guy giving it to you. Come on, that's the fact. It always works. Right? Don't, it's reality. So I applied the same model to politics. I put them in campuses. Worked. I had about 40,000 people coming across 60 colleges, right? So these cute little boys and girls would fill your form. Now the fun part was that if you made a voter ID, I would give you a 25% discount at the closest bar or coffee shop. So that's your incentive. People criticized me for doing it, but I said, dude, what, do you want people to vote or do you want me to sit at home? Let's do whatever it takes to get them out to come and vote. Vote for whoever, do nota, it doesn't matter. But please go and cast your vote. Now the problem was I only picked that profile of people who were disinterested in politics. I didn't take the people who were clued in. I wanted to take the people who are not clued in, who are not interested in politics, who don't really care about their surroundings but are more bothered about Friday night where we're going out. So there was that set of people. So anyways, so we helped you make your voter ID. Then what we did was, I went and approached all the member of parliaments in Bombay. There's 6 and then there were about 3 to 4 candidates per seat. There's about 24 people. We did something called On the Beanbag. So I got all these MPs, these high MPs, and the candidates from other parties to come and sit on a beanbag at a popular youth hangout and engage with students. About 100-150 opinion leaders from different campuses, have a coffee with them, no bhashan, it's like friends chilling. We developed a format of the event by which the student could understand the leader better and understand the competitor of those leaders better so that they can make an informed choice. Because obviously young people will never go and listen to bhashan. So I have to make political discourse in a format which appeals to them, right? So we got MPs on a beanbag. Similar to this, we did a lot of things. So one night before elections, I got 100 Harley bikes on the streets of Bombay called the Right to Vote, and I got all these stars, Vishal Dadlani, Pura Kohli on bikes, Monica Dogra, obviously I guess you know her. All these people on bikes, they went around Bombay telling people to go out and vote. We did something called the Voters Party at Hard Rock cafes across Bombay, where if you had a black dot, and at night you could go and party at Hard Rock for free. If you were part of the Black Dot community, that's why Operation Black Dot. So that was one experiment of making something as drab as politics cool, and the result was 40,000 people voted, right? So that really encouraged me in my hypothesis that if social change and social awareness was made into a format that appeals youngsters, there is potential. So now I am working on a startup called Social Quotient, as I said. Now the theory behind that startup is, charity in India is always a burden. People, whenever you go out, I'm sure you guys do college events, and when you go out to ask for funding, it's not very easy. Or if you start an NGO and you go ask for funding for a very good project, it's not easy, right? So the idea was, on one side, to make social change cool for youth, but on the other hand, develop a model where brands can use a social cause as a platform to market itself, with which I can command a higher premium than an NGO would get, be able to attract more better talent to work for a good cause, because at the end of the day, unfortunately, in NGOs you're really not so cool people working. You have these sectarian people, they work 10 to 5. Imagine if some of the best NGOs, some of the most, not the best, but some NGOs doing some really good work on ground, if they had smarter, more efficient people working in a corporate style for them. Imagine the level and degree of impact. Imagine if most organizations started using technology, more technology to implement their projects, right? But they don't. Lack of funding, lack of insight, lack of good skilled human resource. So Social Quotient, what it basically does is addresses that need gap. What we do is, we create a model where the guy who's funding us is not a donor, but becomes more like a powered by, or not a sponsor, but like a, more like an enabler, by which they get more advantage, more than just a logo. I won't give you the details because that'll be too long, but just imagine that a guy, for example, say a Pepsi is funding a project, they will get more than just a logo, right? So I'm solving his challenge of getting more ROI. Therefore, I can command a higher premium, with which I can attract better people to work for my project, make it profitable for me, because, cut back to the past, I never made money out of any social change that I did. Never ever made any money. And that was kind of irritating, right? I know I have talent, I know I have something to offer, but I'm not getting anything in return. And the balance between self and social is key. You can't always be fully altruistic. That's not true. It will not be sustainable. If you are going to remain hungry, you can't feed somebody else for the rest of your life. That's what I think. So I said that by such a model, I can attract more money for myself. I can use better tools to implement the project, therefore resulting in a higher impact, right? So that's what Social Quotient is about. Operation Black Dot was once an example. We were sponsored by a company called Clean and Clear, right, who only does fresh face. But after associating with Operation Black Dot, won 2 cars and all the advertising awards in Bombay, Goa Fest, Wow Awards, whatever. So now Social Quotient is that. Now the other project that I'm working on is a seed fund for women entrepreneurs that she spoke about. So cut back to Dharavi. After adopting school, I got to meet a lot of young women in Dharavi, and they had so much potential, so much talent. They were doing such interesting stuff, but they didn't have the resources, they didn't have the skill set, they didn't have the tools. So another idea I had was, can we develop a seed fund for young women entrepreneurs in Dharavi, by which what we're doing today is we are investing about 5 lakhs in a group of 8 women and 10 such sets of 8 women, giving them 5 lakhs, asking them to come up with a business idea. So right now we're working on catering, and we're also going to be working on a domestic staff training school. So what we do is we give 5 lakhs to a group of 8 women through a selection procedure. We give them training based on whatever business idea that they decide. We not only give them training, we also give them mentoring. We also appoint a business manager for them, and we take them from 0 to 5, and we exit when we get our 5 lakh rupees back. But by doing that, instead of doing typical charity and saying, oh, women are, the weaker section of society, let's go and help them, I'm actually empowering them in its true meaning, because I'm giving them resources with which they can support themselves and their families for the rest of their life. So that's Nimaya Foundation. Nimaya means opportunity. Because I always think that in India, again, as I said, charity is always, like the guy who's giving is always on the higher pedestal than the person who's receiving. And I think that's a very bad and very unhealthy equation. Here, I am telling the person that I'm giving money to, that I'm believing in your potential. I'm not giving you money because you're a sad, poor woman from Dharavi. I'm giving you money because you're a talented woman from Dharavi. There's a big difference in that. That boosts her morale as well. And she feels good, her husbands feel happy, their children feel happy, their children study in my school. So I'm helping the mother with income, I'm giving the child free education, the entire family is happy, the community as a whole is progressing. So that's Nimaya Foundation. Our target is to support 100 such groups of 8 women, that's 800 women by 2015. We already have raised the required money for it. We're just going slow because, you know, we also want to learn. We just started in late 2013. The other project that I'm working on is called the Green Batti project, which is something that is just about to start. You guys have heard of Big Brother, Big Sister USA? Yeah. So, mentoring, right? Now just imagine a boy in slum, right? His parents are fighting, or mother is getting beaten up, or dad is drunk. But still, you know, he's what, 11 to 15 years of age. What's his future? He has no future. That's the reality. And I got to know that when I interacted with my kids in Harare. So I was in New York for a meeting with the UN. I met the Big Brother Big Sister guys, and I was talking to them. I got an idea. Okay, of course, it's not my original idea, but I was inspired by Big Brother Big Sister. But I said, why can't I bring the concept of mentoring to India? So I came back and I did a pilot experiment. This is all under social quotient. Green Batti is also under social quotient. So we did a pilot experiment, and I got about 10 of my friends, and I got 10 kids from my school in Dharavi. I took a curriculum from Big Brother Big Sister and said, let's do a pilot mentoring program and see what happens. You know, it was so shocking. My own friends who partied with me for like 6 hours every Saturday could not give 2 hours a week for a child from Dharavi. And they said, Sunday morning, on there, I'm hungover, I have this, that. Unlike in USA, where, you know, there the people think a bit differently when it comes to giving their time for social cause. We're a bit more selfish. It's there within us, and there's nothing wrong or right, it's just there. So I did this experiment. I realized that, you know, in India, if mentoring has to work, I have to create value for the mentors also. Only then will they give their time for a child in Harare. So we worked for about 6 months, did lots of research, we spoke to a lot of people, and we come up with something called the Green Batti project. Green Batti because the green light's always moving forward, where about 500 young professionals will mentor 500 children from lower income groups / slum areas in Bombay. Now I've developed a model where I'm able to incentivize the mentors also. So they don't mind giving their 2 hours a week, every week for the next 6 months. It's a 6-month cycle for one program. Their incentives are many, not just free beers and discounts on beers, but for example, I do master classes for them. So I got them to interact with Raghuram Rajan, the governor of RBI, those who are in the finance sector. I'm getting some to interact with Piyush Pandey, those who are in advertising. So I'm trying to give them incentive to be associated with me because, and in turn they can mentor the kids that I'm working with. So we developed an entire cycle of self and social. And we've developed a curriculum where you use the tab, the iPad, not the iPad, but a tab, to mentor the child, you know. We are giving the child life skills, social skills, exposure, we are giving them confidence, emotional intelligence. The idea being that because these children, as I said, come from broken homes or troubled homes, lack positive adult influence in their life with which they can move forward. So the idea was that this mentor fills that gap. So, and we brought a brand on board, one of India's biggest youth brands, which I can't disclose as yet, to power the campaign. I've developed an incentive for the brand as well, as I explained, the theory of social quotient. So that's another project that I'm working on which is something I'm really passionate about. Now, all these projects, you know, I'm not here to just rant about myself. I just wanted to give you a brief of what I do. So now let's get to the learnings. Let's get to what you guys can take away from my blabbering today. One of the things that I learned is to pick the right people to work with. Something that always has helped me. I have, as I said, right now only I've spoken about 6 projects and I have at least 2 or 3 more in the pipeline. For example, I'm very excited to tell you, a mobile app that can help you volunteer. So what happens is, let's say you wake up on a Saturday morning, you say, I care about the environment, I want to give 2 hours. The mobile app will tell you where you can go and volunteer. And the more you volunteer for that cause, the more incentives you get. Right? So that's another idea anyways. So, one thing is the right kind of people, the right kind of teams. So, nowadays there are so many young people with so many bright ideas wanting to come and work with a young entrepreneur. How do you choose? So your filter is key. Loyalty is of course important, but most importantly, they shouldn't be like-minded. They should always continue to challenge you. Because if your people don't challenge you, if your people don't question you, you will not progress. So making the right kind of team, that was one. Secondly, I realized that if I have to do 6, 7, 8, 10 projects at one point of time, I can't micromanage each. Because if I start micromanaging each, I'll never be able to accomplish anything. So once you develop that trust factor with your various teams, you have to give people the free hand. Even if you're doing one project and you have a team, I think it's very important to give a free hand to the people, because that's when they'll start taking ownership of what they are doing. Otherwise, they will feel like an employee. None of the people that work with me are my employees. They don't work for me, they work with me. Even though they might not have equity in what I do, they might not make as much money as I do, but in decision making, in the format of our organization, they feel that they are owners of the project. That was one. Secondly, you need to build certain key relationships. So why I was talking so much about the UN was, the UN is the reason why I am what I am today. I built such strong relations with everybody at the UN, right from the New York headquarters to the Delhi office, that a lot of doors opened up for me because of the UN, to the government, to international bodies, to funders. So certain relationships that you must build, and certain key relationships, that is very, very, very important. I mean, today, my brief from Ninad is to talk about myself, so forgive if I sound a bit pompous. But today I can walk into the Tata Motors chairman's office. Why? I'll give you an example of a project I did, and I'll tell you why am I saying this. So, the Nano is a poor man's car. Unfortunately, I think the only blunder Ratan Tata ever made in his life was saying it's a poor man's car. So I was called upon by the chairman, and he had read a report. I write once a month. I publish the youth report. So I didn't know that the chairman of Tata reads my reports. So he called upon me and said, I've read this stuff that you write. Tell me what I can do to reinvent the Nano. So I said, look, your product is not the problem. It's your brand that is the problem, and it's your statement which is a bigger problem. No young person is ever going to buy a poor man's car. Even if I am actually poor, I'm not going to buy a poor man's car. Right? Nano had the potential to become a cult car. So, he said, okay, come back to me with an idea. So I developed something called the Tata Nano Student Brand Managers Program and the Tata Nano Young Professionals Program, which has been one of the most awarded youth activity for 3 years in a row. You can check it out. What we did was, our reality was product is good, brand sucks, right? What do? We actually gave, for a period of 30 days, 100 nanos to 100 youth influencers across 6 metros. So 600 nanos given, with 1 month of fuel. And what did I do? What did I say? My proposition was, so say for example you are one of the most popular kids on your campus, or the coolest guy in your office. Okay, so the program worked at 2 levels, students and young professionals. So I would give the car to you. I would give you money for fuel for 30 days. Your task was, take your friends around for a drive. Take them out every day, and every weekend, for the 4 weekends that you have the car, you have to go on a road trip and create social media content about your road trip. Because you have 3,000 Facebook friends, because you have 1,000 plus Twitter followers, it's a lot of exposure, right? So for 30 days, every day, there was a new story, a new experience with a Tata Nano into 600 people, into at least 10 friends each that they would take around. So we told 6,000 people in effect about the Tata Nano, right? What happened? Out of that, the sales conversion was, I think, 18 to 19%, which basically proved that if the product superseded the brand now, because the brand sucks, you will sell. Which is why if you see the new Nano Twist came. So Nano Twist was the result of this activity, where we gave insights into what youth wants. So then, obviously now my relationship with the Tatas the Tata companies is very strong. So what I was talking about is key relationships. Now, how do you build these key relationships? Is by delivering. It's not like the Tatas like my face. It's not that pretty. It's not like the Tatas like the way I spoke. It's what I did. So it's very important to create a relationship of transaction with someone who you think that you will need in the future, and they will need you. Secondly, third thing is what I learned is when I was 17, sitting on a beach in Goa, I made a PowerPoint presentation for myself. 5-year business plan for Samyak Chakrabarti. That's what I did. Sounds a bit freaky, but I did that. I actually sat down on that beach, I remember, Anjuna, and I wrote where I want to be and what it takes to reach there. So everything that I did was a step to a larger goal. Youth marketing, social change, the UN, building relationship with brands like Tata's. I have a relationship with Pepsi and some key relationships, because then everything becomes the sum of all. Problem with those born after 1988 is that we work in silos. We don't know what we want. We just go by the flow. Today you are an IIM, tomorrow you might become a photographer. There is no connectivity, right? Unfortunately, that cannot work in today's times. At a very early age, at that 17 age, I realized that the generation and the time that I am born in is more competitive than ever before. Right? Today you have about 140 people sitting here. You're a first year IIM, right? There must be at least 1,000 business colleges in India. Good or bad doesn't matter. At least 1,000. If you take an average of 100 people per college, I think some places are much more. It's 1 lakh people graduating every year. More than 1 lakh people graduating every year. You might be the smartest guy in the room, but yet you might not make the cut, right? There are many variables for you to get success. So if I have to differentiate myself, if I need these things, I need these luxuries, right? I have these wants, this is where I want to be, I need to prepare a roadmap. So that's what I learned at a very early age. And I need to sit and think, and this is what I need to do to reach there. And what are the people required? So like you make a business plan, resources, investment, people, human resources, infrastructure. You can do that for yourself, which is why I'm able to integrate everything that I'm doing, because the core element of it being youth. So the business plan for yourself. The other thing is, which is very important, which I realized at an extremely young age, is building and developing a niche for yourself. What are you known for? Now, I'm not going to offend anyone of you, but it's a reality. I have lots of MBA people working in my team, and I asked them, why are you here? I asked them what you thought. Now, what are you guys? Sales, marketing, finance? 3 top ones, right? Three big words. Very few people will get into further niche. Like you, everyone's thinking the same. You know, there are, like as I said, 1 lakh people wanting to get into sales every year, 1 lakh people into marketing, 1 lakh plus people into finance. What is your niche? So developing a niche for yourself is very, very, very important. As I come back, youth marketing, youth social change is my niche. It's a unique niche, so it's easy for me to say because there are not many people focusing on this word youth. But I'm sure you can find a niche in what you do if you introspect, if you look around. It's very important because remember, as I said, that my next book, the title is 1988. It basically traces the evolution of youth post those born after 1988. Times are very difficult for us. It's too competitive. Today, there was war happening even in the 1940s. But young people never woke up to news of war because there was no NDTV app flashing on your very smartphone. You wake up to news of rape, you wake up to news of disaster. It really influences our generation, right? It really influences us. It makes us afraid. You guys are living in Shillong, 100 kilometers from here. There's war happening all around you, 100 kilometer radius. So we live in very difficult times, and for us to not only survive but enjoy, but to live, we need to be smart. We can't go with the flow. I know it's against the spirit of being young and being free, but at the end of the day, you know, things are needed to pay our bills and things are needed to compensate for the money you spend to sit on that chair. So yes, so developing a niche is very, very important. Then also, for example, I never paid much. This is about me. It's honestly about you. I am students. I never paid much heed to the academic learning that I received. In fact, when I was in college, I never even attended college. I was just telling the colleagues that I never ever attended college. I was working throughout my college days. because I believe that there's so much to learn from the world outside. There's so much to learn from experiences outside the classroom that I sometimes find that the classroom suffocate and limit us. But that was one thing that I did, not necessarily something you need to do. Yeah, so this is about my journey. Any questions up till now? Any questions at all? Yeah.
So, you told about different things that you, whenever you did something, you get success in it. Means whenever you approach someone, you get success. In your life, didn't you face any situation where you were rejected or where you were, where someone rejected your offer?
You know, often when you're called to speak at conferences, they only ask you to speak about your successes and not your failures. I wish there was an event where people appreciated me talking about your failures. But no, I had many disappointments. So you know something, I am one of the most hated people in my social circuits, number one. Hated not because I did anything wrong, hated because I work very differently. I faced a lot of rejection in personal relationships, and I don't mean girlfriend. I mean, you know, in your surrounding, because of the way I function. So there was rejection. Rejection even in the professional setting. Not every idea that I went and pitched got success. You know, I only give you highlights of the good things. Now let me tell you about the bad things, the wrong things and the rejections. So, you know, as I said, firstly, the first model UN I wanted to attend was first rejected. I had to find my way to enter it. So that was rejection. The first thing was rejection. The second route was whoever was successful in helping us deliver our message, whether it is the mentoring program, whether it is Black Dot, whether it is the 50 other projects that we were doing. That's how we collated data. We had actually a secret meeting. So I made that cool. I made college kids feel like they are some next James Bond. And we developed this offline social network of insight seekers and conversation seeders. So what we also do, and I can very confidently say that I might have 5 to 6 people in this campus also. I don't know the names, I have a large team now. There may be 5 to 6 people in this campus we pay people a certain amount to keep telling us what's happening in campuses. So insight seekers and conversation seeders. So we also pay people to seed conversation about brands. So one of you here maybe would be getting paid from me or through my company to talk about one of my clients without his friends knowing at all. So we've developed that network. We call it the Youth Intelligence Network as a parallel synonym. So that's how I know who the influencers are. Any other questions? Trouble? Yeah.
Tell us how you recharge and refuel. Everybody burns out and you sometimes get your work home, but everyone should have a balanced life, you know, a sustainable.
How do I recharge and refuel?
Yeah.
You really want to, I don't think you can say it here. One and a very common thing you might have heard, I really enjoy what I do. So it's not, I don't do it because I have to. I do it because I want to. And that's a huge difference. Which is why I said something that, you know, I don't enjoy much academics or a formal degree, because I'm sorry to say 7 out of 10 of you are going to go out there and are going to work as a management trainee. You're going to hate your boss, you're going to hate your life, because bosses sometimes suck. And you're going to hate what you do, because how passionate can you be about selling somebody else's product? Sorry, that's me thinking. So one answer is that I really like what I do. I wake up and I sleep with what I do. Yeah. Secondly, I have this rule for myself, and you being a Facebook friend might have seen I travel quite often. So I have a rule that every 45 to 60 days I have to take off somewhere or the other. If I'm traveling speaking at a conference like Shillong, you know, I'm supposed to be here today, tomorrow and day after I'm going to travel, I'm going to chill, not use my phone. If I'm abroad, I'll go somewhere where I just chill alone. And I go alone, I don't go with people. This trip, of course, that's not possible. So travel is my way to recharge and refuel. And of course, certain other things, which we don't talk about here. But we all share that same common. Yeah. But again, you know, sorry, to be fair to your question and for your learning, Beverly is right. Beverly, by the way, sitting here, we should introduce, I have to, has been India's first and only youth representative to the United Nations from the Northeast. Shillong, And so I didn't mention it because I don't like to put people on the spot, but since he raised his hand, that he's been one of the people who actually followed him, because of whom I'm on the path that I am. He of course doesn't know that. So, and I'm trying to get his post, but our government never really listens anymore. I want to be India's next future president of the UN, but it's difficult. That's another story for lunch. Yeah.
All the initiatives that you talked about.
Yeah.
Sorry, my name is Neeta.
Hi.
Hi. All the initiatives that you talked about were very localized to Mumbai. Are you planning to take them outside? How are you planning to?
So I have this, I always like to do what I can. Okay. Now the Mudra initiatives, the Mudra companies across the country, there are 6 obviously that we have. But my social initiatives are only in Bombay. I don't scale up because I don't want to lose the fundamentals of what I do. Often I have seen case studies of people who expand, and because they have expanded, they lose their core and they lose their soul. See, I am doing whatever social initiatives I want because I want to see some change in the world around me, in the immediate world around me. And I don't want to open an office for some NGO in Delhi which I'm not going to be able to micromanage. Right? So no, I'd rather do it in Bombay because I can control it. Even if I can't influence a million lives, even if I can influence 100,000 lives, I think it's good enough. There's no point because I might appoint some manager in some other city who might not share the same vision and passion as me, who might screw things up for me. So no, Bombay. The company of course is across the country, but that's a business. Yeah.
Hello, Pradeep. How do you manage to get a reply from Shashi
Tharoor@un.org. Simple. So you know what? This is the other thing. Good question. So I have, and again, I'm not going to sound pompous, but just to answer your question. Today I have a one-on-one association with him, Raghuram Rajan, RBI, the former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, people in politics, people in business. Never be afraid. Who are they? They are humans. So it's the way you talk to them. Today, I can proudly say that I have access to whenever I want to talk 25 CEOs, politicians, media people, whoever, like your favorite Arnab Goswami. We talk almost every second, third day about youth issues. I realize this again that often people get a bit crumpled, young people get a bit crumpled when they talk to somebody about them in achievement. There is no point. In fact, those people respect. Tharoor must be respecting that this banda from Mumbai is sending me an email. There must be something, no? So they respect it, and your attitude and the way you address. I don't say, Sarji, you are so great. No, you want something, you ask for it because they also want something from you. My thing is very clear. I have access to youth. The UN wanted it. I gave it one-on-one. News reporters, the RBI governor, politicians, media people, they all want to access and understand you. That's how we develop ideas.
But like, are these people like Raghuram Rajan that much accessible to like
It's how you access it. So I'll tell you how I did it. Good question. They are not accessible. You can't walk into the RBI office. That's a fact. I am not a lucky sperm. I don't have a last name that I can use to get access. What I do, I have something called the United Nations Young Changemakers Conclave that I organized since 2011. Right? It's like a tech type conference where we get all these speakers to come and talk to you. The best thing, right? You're coming to speak to a UN conclave or send an invite from a UN letterhead. That creates access. Samyak and Ajit can't send a mail to Shashi Tharoor or Raghuram Rajan, but as the president of the United Nations Young Changemakers Conclave, I can. So that's how I get them to speak at my conference. Obviously, they speak at my conference, they have to meet me, they have to talk to me. That's how I start my relationship. That's how I open the door, and then it's up to how I take it forward. So, the answer to your question being that you need to develop a strategy. So, if you want to meet someone, if you so desperately want to meet someone, you have to develop a strategy. I'll give you a funny story. So, you guys know this lady called Fatima Bhutto? One of the prettiest women I've ever seen in my life. I really wanted to meet her. What did I do? I organized TED conferences. I got her to speak at the TED conference and I met her. That's how I do it. So you always need an approach. You always need a approach strategy. It's not easy. I'm saying it. It's not easy. It requires some 50 emails and 500 follow-ups. Of course it does. But you can still do it. It's not difficult. The Prime Minister, former Prime Minister acknowledged Operation Black Dot campaign. I had lunch with him at his house on the 18th of December. It's on my Facebook. 18th December is when the Lokpal bill was passed. I didn't know him from anywhere. I just sent an email and I just I found out 2 or 3 people who I can access him through. I engaged with them. I was sitting at the PM residence. It's possible. Hillary Clinton was in Calcutta in 2012. Wanted to meet her. So if you see, there are about 3 young people who engaged with her. I was one of them because I used to organize my UN conclaves at the American Embassy long time ago. Use that access to get to Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State. So yeah. Yeah. Okay.
My question, you talked about mobilizing the youth pan India for facing issues, right?
Hmm.
When you look at the Northeast, for example, there's
Yeah.
a lot of potential,
Yeah.
but then not a lot of scope for people from the Northeast actually go out and make an impact. How do you
Wait. Sorry. So you're saying not a lot of scope for Northeast people to go and make an impact or impact happening in Northeast?
Either way, plus there's no more scope for us, the Northeast, to actually go out and make an impact.
Why?
That is something I want to know. For example, is there a scope by which you can travel anything more inclusive?
This is a very political question you asked. Firstly, I think that Northeast is not an alien or a distant. It's an integral part of India. If a boy from Calcutta can do it, so can a boy from Shillong. There is no difference.
Infrastructure is not in place. For
No, you said go out. I don't understand your question.
So when you say, for example, you are organized in Bombay,
Yeah.
like the ISEC or Eastern India, but
Yeah.
you don't have chapters in the Northeast, for example.
Right.
Me as a Northeastern, if I want to be a part of an initiative that is the ISEC or the Eastern India, how do I be a part of it?
Write an email to the person who has state training and say, I want to start a Shillong chapter or wherever you're from. That's how you do it. You take the initiative. Yes, and maybe the situation here is more difficult than in Bombay for various political reasons. Of course, I don't deny that. But if you're going to say how, you have to find the answer yourself. There is no how. See, that's the thing. Like today, there are lots of talk on entrepreneurship, right? You guys will be having a lot of talks on entrepreneurship. How can you teach someone entrepreneurship? People say, how do I start a business? There is no how. You just do it. If you have an idea, you have consistent and sustained belief, you find a road. It's a very simple equation. It's not difficult. You want to start an ISEC chapter, I give you the email ID of the ISEC India head today. Write an email, start an ISEC, I am Shillong. And your biggest advantage is I am. Who I am.
In fact, in 2011, I did start ISEC chapter in Northeast. It happened the first in the Northeast.
Okay?
I was in my engineering college in ISEC job.
Okay.
But talking from experience, starting ISEC chapter in the Northeast is very difficult to get off the ground. First thing, there's no...
Let's name your difficulties. Name your top 3 difficulties. I'll give you a solution now.
First one is there's no exposure for the youth. For example, if I come and sell me, let's start ISEC chapter here. They'll be very curious, is it going to add any value to me? First, it's not there.
That's your first challenge, right? The base that you the exposure. Very simple. Very valid point. So ISEC in Bombay works because there's lots of. Firstly, what I'm about to say, I don't respect it, but ISEC in Bombay works because people get to party and meet new people. I think that's a very, very screwed up reason for why being a part of ISEC, but it exists. Now, let's not take ISEC as an example because ISEC as a body has failed why it started. Let's say Teach for India. So you want to start a Teach for India chapter in Shillong for which you need young people to become fellows and teach children in schools. You guys know how Teach for India works, right?
Yes.
Young people teach in schools under children. So your first challenge is to build a bunch of 10 to 15 Teach for India young fellows like yourself who will teach in schools. Develop a program where you go and tell the Teach for India people that the Northeast functions differently from the remaining part because Northeast these things are new. Can we develop a program where these 15, 20, 30 kids that I get an opportunity to go to spend a week in Delhi and learn from there, or they go and get to meet someone or go and get inspired or motivated by somebody. That's your first incentive for 30 people. They'll get to go outside their immediate environment and go and learn something from outside. That's why they will come and work with you. What's your second challenge?
Second was convincing the stakeholders.
Like,
So, for example, in my college, we convincing the administration, convincing the sponsors across.
sponsors is easiest. Youth marketing, you're giving access to youth. Don't talk to the guy heading the brand in Northeast. Go and try to talk to the guy heading in Delhi. Everything is available on LinkedIn. Head of marketing, Coca-Cola Delhi. You'll get the email because, for example, this is the truth. While when I posted on Facebook, I'm going to Shillong. One of my clients said, "Boss, local project and I'm local." Northeast में तो youth marketing हो ही नहीं रहा है. Northeast is so much of potential, but the guy sitting in Northeast will not see his own potential. The guy sitting in Delhi and Bombay will realize the potential of Northeast. So yeah, you will get sponsorship very easily. If you say you're giving them an access to 500, eventually 5,000 youngsters in Northeast India, you've got as much money as you want. But you know what I see is that you're not confident of what you're saying because you're a bit scared, you're a bit unsure. The trick is when you talk to someone, when you want someone, it's the way you say it. As you guys know Malcolm Gladwell, right?
Yes.
He says it in so many books. It's just the way you say it. You should go and say, you should write to the Teach for India people saying, don't help me start in Northeast. Say, I have this base in Northeast, do you want to come to Northeast? There's a big difference. If you write a mail saying, please come to Northeast, they're not going to come. If you write a mail saying, do you want to come to Northeast? Because I have a bunch of fellows ready to work with you, they will come. Right now, so you have to be very sure in the way you say it and how you say it and what you say. Don't be scared. Northeast is not Israel and Palestine, it's India. It's a very integral and a loved part of India. So yeah, next. Waiting for it.
Hi, I'm Siddharth.
Hi.
You talked about the Nirmaya Foundation. So I can see a lot of parallels between Nirmaya and Grameen.
Yeah.
So I want to know, like in India, many such organizations came up. They did well in the beginning, but they were not able to progress later on. So what do you plan to do differently?
So see, we are firstly not giving microfinance. We're not giving a loan. I'm giving a seed investment. So I'm ready to do the investment. There is no mortgage. I'm not giving it to you as a loan. There is no loan agreement. It's like me as a venture capitalist or an angel investor investing in 8 women. Only difference being there are 8 women living in slums and not 8 women from IIM. That's the only difference. Now, the way we worked around our model is problem with the banking microloan system is very few actually gave mentoring and saw the business through. Here I am going to appoint a business manager for each business I invest in. So I am actually micromanaging the business, number 2. Number 3 is that unfortunately, India has become suddenly this country of startups. Where we only think of the next 6 months but not the next 6 years. Before starting on day 1, I got funding for 2 years. I already have funding, I already have an office, I already have sound infrastructure. So the only reason I might fail is if the businesses I invest in, all of them fail and I lose all the money. Because the idea is that the money I invest in, I recover and invest it back in more women. So that cycle will stop if I'm not able to recover the money. So again, as I said, future planning. A lot of these people just start off, they are only funded for 6 months and then they die out. That's the problem. Hi, Yash.
The question that I have is, you said carve out a niche for yourself, right? Now you said that the niche for you right now is youth engagement or understanding the youth. Now in let's say another 5 or 6 years, like you said, and I don't mean to sound cynical, but by the time you're 30 or 32, you won't understand youth as well as you understand.
Absolutely true.
And what next?
So what next for me? I'm joining politics. I'm not kidding. And in politics, 45 is called young these days. You know what I'm talking about. So I have made a plan for myself that I want to join politics because for me it's very important to make a difference. And I think if people like you and me join Indian politics, the quality of politics will be much better. I've already made my money, so I'm not going to go and join politics to make any money. And I have very finite wants in life. I don't have unlimited wants. I don't want to be a Sharad Pawar with 10,000 crores but can't do anything with 10,000 crores. I want to be able to have my 5, 10 and be able to enjoy them. That's my thinking. So you can sit down. One answer to your question is I want to join politics, so that's for myself. And I have built a succession plan in my company. So I've identified about 5 to 7 21-year-olds today who will take over everything that I do. So I might continue to have an interest in it, whether business or personal, but there will be somebody else taking reins from me. So the succession plan is already in place. For me, I think that I've chosen politics because of my intent of making some of the other difference. I don't know which party I come from, no political background, I haven't decided. Definitely not the Aam Aadmi Party, even though someone like me would sound to me in Aam Aadmi Party. But so that's next for me. But as you very rightly pointed out, that one of the mistakes that I made earlier, and not thinking at that time I had not thought of politics, was I chose a field where there's a finite expiry date. As you said, like 28, 29, I can't be youth anymore. So the niche you guys want to see if it lasts for a longer time, right? And the other thing about me always knowing what the youth is doing, I still don't know what the youth is doing. It has been about 4 years since I've been in college, but I spoke about the student intelligence network we are developing. So the offline social networks, that will always continue, right? How it happens is if you are a part of my network, it's your job to pass on the baton to somebody else that you choose when you graduate. So a lot of what we did comes out of experimentation. So when you ask parameters, that's obviously you're talking typical market research where you have these set benchmarks. We don't work like that. Because so I have about 85% efficiency, not 100%, but it works for me because typical market research is based on questionnaires and there is all focus group discussions. That's your two basic ways of taking information, but there is no control on the truth behind it. There is no guarantee that your respondents are writing the truth. There is no guarantee that an FGD, the person speaking his mind. Here, the person I'm researching does not know that he's being researched. Right? Because I don't know that I'm judging you. You don't know that I am scouting you to be a part of my network. You don't know that I am trying to understand what you're passionate about. I'm just listening to you. That's how it works. And that's something that actually is very big in the Western world now, this form of alternative market research. Because conventional market research has a lot of plus minus that is possible. Now, the truth being that typical market research companies, when you tell them that about 10 lakh respondents are to survey sheets, the reality is that they do it themselves. It's a very stupid reality. It happens. If you ever work for a market research company, you will see. You will get to answer. Yeah. What do you mean generalization? Yeah, sorry. No. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. We don't pick random, right? I told you how we do it. So we've already worked with these people through our social projects, so we know that. So it's not random. I think somebody there asked me that question. That it's not a random pick. So I won't just come to a college and say, raise your hands those who want to be part of my network. No. I'll say, raise your hands those who want to work with me for something like Operational Blackrock. That's how I know what you're doing, that's how I know what you're capable of. And then I recruit you into this other thing that I do. Yeah. 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 Hi, Pradeep.
Sir, most of the people you talk about were like through giving incentives.
Yeah.
Do you think you should do something like it comes from inside the person to vote or to dismantling people from?
So
because this thing is like not sustainable to give incentives to all the person who vote. I think they will like a mentality that okay, if you will get incentives.
So your question is, why does social change or participating, doing something good always need to have an incentive? Why can't it be inherent? Please have a seat. It's a very ideal thing that you said, but I think that we've moved beyond 1947, where freedom fighters gave their lives purely for their country. What I'm saying is unfortunate. I'm not proud about what I say, but the reality is, so as I said, one of the books that I'm working on, 1988, traces the evolution of youth force in India and urban post-88. And because of so many influences, like social networks, like the way the world is and rampant consumerism, it has really shaped us to become very selfish people in nature, which is something that sociologists have also acknowledged, that today's generation is definitely more selfish than its previous generation, which is a reality. Now, I can either sit down and say that if there are 140 people in the room, if only 10 people come to plant trees outside, it's fine, at least those 10 came genuinely. But if I found a way to get all 140 people, whatever the way is, people criticize me, but I did a tree plantation drive in Bandra where I live. I got Kingfisher to sponsor the after party. Plant trees and come party. What's wrong? If I find a way to get you to do what you should, but that way is slightly commercial or slightly, self-motivated, what's wrong? You're still planting trees, right? There'll be 140 new trees that will be planted. It's going to help the environment. What am I doing? I'm just giving you a beer afterwards. Or if someone gave an alcohol and party, if you're mentoring, we give you so when Teach for India, for example, let's take a more credible example than this beer. Teach for India gives all its fellows certificates, and those who overperform it gives recommendation letters. People criticize Teach for India for doing it because most of the people are only coming for the certificate and letters. Very good, so what? At least 100 more kids are going to get good education. One fellow teaches about 2 to 3 classes, which is about 100 kids. So smart people are taken in. Smart people are coming in because they want to go to university abroad. So they want that letter, but they're also delivering them. And if they don't deliver, they'll be asked to leave. So there's nothing wrong in developing a model where self and social comes in balance. There's nothing wrong. You're here in IIM not because you love IIM. You're paying 12 lakhs because you get a job worth 24 lakhs when you graduate. You're not coming to learn. Let's not bullshit each other. No one is here to learn. No one loves Philip Kotler here. We just read. Yeah. Yes.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is
Samir,
Abhay.
not sir.
My name is Abhay.
Hi.
So you said that you wanted to get into politics.
I wanted. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's always that thin line which separates a political leader from a social worker. So
I'm
do
not a
you
social
feel-
worker, please.
So but then you have taken initiative for getting something good for the society.
Yeah.
So do you feel that being a politician you'll be able to contribute the same way as
Firstly,
being
I got your question. Firstly, I'm not sure whether I'm going to be a politician. Don't talk about what I'm wearing. I want to. Now, I made it's a very valid point. Please, your question is how will I put the fine line between being a politician or
like
actually?
the case was with Arvind Kejriwal, like
That's another
he was
discussion. So, anyways, yeah, I got your point. Have a seat, please. Very good question. I made a very conscious choice of where I want to try and go next, because we live in a democracy, and in a democracy, it is only the government that can make policy. The citizen can try to influence policy, but can never formulate policy. Right? That was Arvind Kejriwal's reasoning also, breaking away from Anna Hazare and starting the Aam Aadmi Party, because he said that by doing hunger fasts, I can't change anything beyond point. Very valid point. Now, the problem is that your intent and your personal willpower is key. Right? It's a very personal, individual thing. So I am also scared that what if I become the next, I'm not putting myself on a pedestal, but what if I become the next Aam Aadmi Party guy, where I went to do something but ended up doing something else. It's a risk I am taking, but I am very sure that if I want to make any tangible change, if I want to make scalable change in a democracy, being a part of governance is the only way. What can a social worker do? What can he do? Beyond the point. He at the end of the day, he still has to go to the establishment to enable the difference he wants to write. There have been so many examples of so many real good people with good projects who fail because they don't have influence on policy. So yeah, I think that I'm strong-willed, and I think that if I get a chief ministership, I won't give it in 49 days, at least I think so. But even if I became anything, I will not let the opportunity go. So yeah. But yeah, the answer is for me, I think tangible change can be made if you are sitting in politics, and I think the quality of Indian polity has to improve. We need people like you and me to be in parliament. People like this should be sitting at parliament, not in IIM or IIT alone. I think so some of our best and the most high potential people either go abroad or to give their talent and resources to some other country, or they're only filling their own coffers. They're not doing anything also for the country and also for themselves. And I am not some patriot. It's very simple. If the country is not good, if the country doesn't have good infrastructure, if there is no security, I am only being harmed. So it's not like I'm doing it for someone else. I'm doing it for myself. Yeah.
So what I saw was in the recent election, it was like people who were more educated, they actually couldn't make the cut. Like they couldn't actually get in against the people who had that ground level of experience. Like getting elected was a problem for them. Majority of the people.
Because you can't run an election only on pure emotional appeal. The problem with you're saying Aam Aadmi Party, they had really good candidates on ground, I accept it.
Even in Congress, I saw the same. They had good leaders.
Sure, they had some good leaders. For example, my member of parliament was Priya Dutt, who wasn't really a bad person. She did a decent work. There was Milind Deva in south of Bombay, doing decent work, couldn't win. See, now this election cannot be a benchmark for anything because the country as a whole was frustrated, right? So we only wanted to vote for the alternative. Most of the, so do you know something, factually speaking, Congress has not lost its vote share. BJP has got new voters to vote for them because in India we have something called first to pass the post. You guys know that, right? Yes. So because of first to pass the post, BJP brought in a larger number of vote share. They won. Congress's 10 crore vote bank was with them and is always going to be with them. Now to answer your other question is to people who actually had merit lost election is because you need to know how to market your merits. That's what I like about Narendra Modi. He over markets it, that's what I hate. But he knows how to market it. It's not like Manmohan Singh didn't achieve anything in 10 years. He did substantial job. He did decent work. But he didn't know how to sell it. So if there are so, Aam Aadmi Party has so many people who have had so much of on-ground qualification. They are qualified people, intelligent people, honest people. They don't know how to market their what they have. Which is why I say that you need a little bit of flamboyance, little bit of public appeal is very important. You can't sit and do dharnas in many elections. It's not cool anymore.
I'm sorry to bring back the discussion back to this topic from politics and around market. So you have you're working in Mudra.
Yeah, I don't work in Mudra. I do JV. I'm very particular about that because I never like to work for anyone.
Yes, I'm sorry. You have a JV with Mudra.
Yeah.
You have social quotient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
A couple of things. So in a situation where you have to choose one to work for the rest of the year, what would you choose?
So see, I'm giving up Mudra. I'm going to resign as per my directorship soon because I'm done with making money. Only do more substantial work. So definitely that's something that's going to be out. I don't have to make a choice because everything is integrated. Youth and social change. So if you keep Mudra out, consultancy and client servicing, this, that, everything is me and social change and youth. So how is there a question of choice? And no one will give me that. Who the hell is going to dare to come and tell me choose? Will never happen.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Sandeep. Sir, you seem to be a soft-spoken person and
Soft-spoken?
Yes, sir. I mean, in politics, we see that most of the successful people are brown So, don't you see that?
I just spoke 1 hour about my achievements, man. How can I be soft-spoken? So I know your question.
Basically, overestimating.
Sorry? Overselling. Yeah, I know what you mean. I know who you're talking about. Yes, it's true. But I'm joining politics to change mindsets. I want to join politics to change mindset. I want to change politics to influence the way people vote. Because if you see today, I think in the next election in 2019, I think there will be more. So you will vote in 2019, right? You may not have voted when you were not you, for example, you're much older, but a lot of people at the age of 17 who are going to be about 23, 24 in the 2019 election, and they are going to vote, and they are the kind of people who will vote for, who will have more access to social media, who will be able to cut through crap, who will know what project has been done, what project has not been done, and vote for the person who delivers the most. So I think that first we had a very silent leader. Then we had a very outspoken leader. I think people will realize that what is the need of the hour is that balance. And hopefully, not me of course, but somebody who will emerge as somebody who's only going to be mild spoken, who will run the country for the right reasons. There is hope for me. I think people are changing. The times are different. People are becoming more self-aware and aware about their surroundings. So I think the quality and the construct of our politics is changing and it's going to change for the positive. That's my assumption. That's my hope. Yeah, something there.
My name is Kalash. My question regarding is your Operation Black Dot. In Bombay, the worst voter turnout was generally in the affluent sectors. Areas. So my question is, how difficult was it to get them to register for your Operation Black Dot?
Very difficult, but to make politics fun and cool. There was a simple answer. We got politicians on beanbags, made voting easy. So what we did was we studied all the reasons why these affluent people don't vote. One of the reasons being very difficult. The process to make an ID. Fine, we got it to your campus. We got you to engage with pretty looking people so you feel good about yourself. The way we, so go check out our Facebook page, the way we did our design, the way we did our communication. We treated Operation Black Dot like a brand. Like everything that came out was of high quality. So they connected with that look and feel. Traditionally, all campaigns of politics and all social campaigns are very drab. The designs are very boring. It's always orange and green and yellow. That's it. But we made it minimal. We made it edgy. So the language used was edgy. So that worked. Three, as I said, we incentivized voting. We told you that you can party if you vote. It worked. So we did all those things that we understood our target audience. As you said, we understood what kind of people influences target audience and what influences the influencers. We understood that, and therefore we got this result. We just got our certificate from the Election Commission. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Neeta. Being somebody who has such a strong insight into the youth today, you talked about how people are going towards being more self-aware. At the same time, there's a lot of diversions that are available to people right now, diversions that take them outside of internal reflection. So, do you see the general trend towards self-awareness or more towards distractions?
I think that distractions make you more self-aware. But that's a philosophical and topic of psychology, not marketing. But to bring your question into this context, yes, while young people are trying to discover themselves and their opinions are being stronger than ever before, there are places and points in life which probably take them to a completely alternative school of thought or alternative line of thought. No, I think that your self-awareness is not reducing, you're just becoming more experimental in nature. So if you are thinking something, if young people are thinking something, for example, let's talk about brand and marketing. If you're loyal to brand X all throughout, but if there is a new brand in the same product segment that comes across, and if a young person shifts to that brand for a while, I just think that it doesn't mean that they've completely changed their beliefs. I just think that they are experimenting something new, and they may or may not come back to it. But at every point, our target audience, urban youth today, is very sure of themselves. That is constant and that doesn't change. They're very well aware of their likes and dislikes. Everybody sways, but that's the thing of human nature. That always happens. It's a 70-year-old sway. Yeah. Done.
Something about politics, like you said, all these guys, young boys and girls, need parliament. The lawbreakers are lawmakers, where do you expect our country to be? That's one question is that.
Yeah.
If one guy, good guy goes, and change, like you said, you need a team, right? You need trust. You cannot change one to alone. You want to. What would be a strategy to enter politics? Because entering alone is no good. You got to enter with a whole team, like a whole group of young people that are elected together at the same time. Using the same model of engaging young people at the national scale, how would you mobilize a whole generation of young people getting elected at the same time to clean up parliament?
That's never going to happen. Ever. It is going to start with 2 people getting in, 4 people getting in, 8 people getting in. That what you're saying is what the Aam Aadmi Party tried to do, is get a whole bunch of really qualified, energetic, passionate people to come and storm the Delhi Assembly. We saw what happened. It has to be a slow and gradual process of changing mindset. So of course, what you have to do is build and mobilize youth on a national level to be able to get 4 or 5 people like me elected, because they will create the wave, right? My strategy is currently to build a team of about a large number of people who will help me run my campaign, whichever party that I work for, who will act like influencers for what I'm trying to say, and hopefully have 3 or 4 people like me in different parties to come into parliament and prove that by having people like me in parliament, they could actually be made a tangible difference could be made, and therefore hopefully in 2 or 3 elections after, people will vote for these kind of people, and political parties will also place these kind of people. See, the problem is what? You and I can't decide who should be the contestant of our constituency. It is political parties who are deciding. So the change has to be in the mindset of political parties that they should start placing people of high quality rather than people who would corrupt back. So I think it's going to be a slow and gradual process. Now you can't storm into parliament. Never going to happen, unfortunately.